All right, guys, welcome to the help video for today's classwork. The first one I'm going to go over is Part B. Most of us got through Part A in class, okay? So for Part B, we want to find the equation of a tangent line. So to do that, we need an x value, which they give us. We need a y value, which they give us. And we also need a slope, which we need to kind of figure out on our own a little bit. The way you find a slope is by taking your derivative and plugging in the values they give you. In this case, my derivative only can have a y plugged into it because there's no x's. So my y value is -2, so I'm going to go ahead and put that in there. And that ends up being 4/9. So my tangent line would be y equals 4/9 x plus 1 minus 2. All right, moving along. Next, they want us to find the second derivative at this point. Okay, so first of all, we need to find the second derivative. So I'm going to take the derivative of this equation up here on the top. And the way we do that is with I think a lot of you guys would use the quotient rule, which is fine. You could use the quotient rule. Well, I guess we'll go ahead and do that. I would have moved this up to the top and just did the power rule, but you can do the quotient rule, and I think most of you would do that, so I'll go with that route. So it's low d high minus high d low. Now, taking the derivative of the bottom requires the chain rule. Draw a line, square below. It's already squared, so we're squaring it again. Okay, now whether or not you want to simplify this is up to you. It doesn't really matter. You just kind of got to be careful, but if you do choose to simplify it. But something that I'll point out is that we have to do two things before we're done. First of all, this y prime right here, we need to replace that with what y prime is. dy over dx, that's just another way of saying y prime. So this is this. So we're just going to replace those two expressions with each other there. All right, so I'm going to go through here and I'm going to erase the y prime. And I'm going to replace that with that whole expression. Just like that. All right? Now the next thing we want to do is we want to plug in the numbers that they give us. Now we don't really need the x because there's no x's here. All we need to do is plug in the y values. So let's do that. I'm going to go through here and I'm going to erase all the y values. And I'm going to plug in the y value that they gave me, which is -2. Now this looks absolutely horrible to have to simplify, but the good news is that this is an FRQ. You don't have to simplify, so you're done. Okay? So that's that. Let's go ahead and move on to Part D. So notice they're asking us to find a derivative of an inverse function. All right? So on our notes over the weekend, I gave you guys some steps. Let's see if we can find them here. There it is. So usually they're going to give you a point that has to do with your original function. From that, we're going to flip it because of the inverse, and then we're going to write the rule. From there, we pretty much just figure out whatever we can, okay? So those are the steps we're pretty much going to follow there to finish this problem off. So right here, that is your function, which apparently is y. So y of 1/6 equals 0. And that means that y inverse of 0 equals 1/6. Now we're going to go ahead and write out our formula. So y inverse prime of 0, which is what they're asking about, is equal to 1 over y prime y inverse of 0. All right, so first thing is this. Y inverse of 0, we know that that equals 1/6. And now we need to find out what is y prime of 1/6. Now this is kind of a tricky thing. Now this is y prime, so you might think, oh, I can just plug 1/6 then and I'm good. But here's the problem with that. The 1/6 is an x value. We need to plug in a y value. So what's the y value that I'll plug in? I'm not going to plug in 1/6 because that's the x. I need to plug in the y value that goes with it. And what is that? It's 0. So actually, to find the derivative of y prime at 1/6, we actually need to plug 0 into this function. I don't think it's 9. Let me back up. It's actually going to be 1, which is 4. Right? And so this becomes 1/4. And there's our final answer there. All right? So you always start with your given fact, you flip it for the inverse, set up your formula, and just start solving whatever you can after that by just plugging things in. All right, moving along to the next part of our FRQ. All right, let g be the function defined by this, and we are wanting to find g prime of -1. So to do that, we need to take the derivative of g first, and that's going to require the quotient rule. So low d high notice I had to do the chain rule to get that. The derivative of the top would be f prime of x squared times the derivative of the inside, which is 2x. So low d high minus high d low. Now the derivative of the bottom is the same, because the derivative of e to the x is just e to the x. And then on the bottom we do draw a line and square below. So there's that. So the next thing I want to do is I want to plug in my -1. And remember, you don't have to simplify. So just plug it in and be done. Actually, there is going to be some simplification required here. I'll show you what I mean in just a second. We do have to do something after this. All right, there's one part of this that we're not allowed to leave, and that's this and this. We have to simplify those at least. You can't leave the functions unevaluated. They do want to make sure that you know how to read the table and get the correct values out of there. All right, so first of all, take note of the fact that -1 squared is just 1. So I'm going to replace that -1 with a 1. And this -1 with a 1. And now we're going to figure out what those things are. What is f prime of 1? Well, here's 1, and f prime is 4/3. So I'm just going to replace this thing here with 4/3. Now let's find the next one. F of 1. So here's 1, and the f value at that point is 2/3. So I'm going to replace this with 2/3. Now at this point, I would say stop. You don't need to go any further. All right? So step 1, find your derivative. Step 2, plug in -1. Step 3, make sure that you find what the f values are. Okay? And that's pretty much what the other ones are going to be like as well here for parts A, B, and C. So let's go ahead and take a look at another one here. Part B. Here's my function h, and I want to find h prime of 1. Well, to take the derivative of h, we're going to need to do the chain rule. And in fact, it's a double chain rule. We have the innermost function, which is -2x. We have the outermost function, which is f. And then we have a middle function here, which is another f. So we have 3 pieces there. So you need to find the derivative of each one and multiply them together. So the derivative of the outside would look like this. The derivative of the middle function would look like this. And the derivative of the innermost function would be that. All right, moving on. Now we want to plug in our 1. If you plug in 1 here, you just get -2. Same thing here. And now we're ready to start evaluating things. So what does this equal according to our table, f prime of -2? It equals 1/3. How about this, f of -2? That equals -3. Finally, what does f prime of -3 equal? I'm sorry, f prime, right? -1. Now, this isn't very hard to simplify, so you can if you want to, but you don't have to. You're done. Okay, so once again, find your derivative, plug in your number, evaluate your f's, and you're all done. All right, let's do one more here, part C. I think there's only one more. Let me see. Is there a D? Nope, there's only a C. All right, one more question. Here we go. Let k be this function here. And we want to find k prime of -1. All right, well, it's going to require 2 different rules. One rule is the product rule, because we do have 2 things being multiplied together. Another rule is, that's a chain rule, because we have an inside function for that piece. Okay? Now, before we begin, I'm going to rewrite this in a slightly different way, just so it looks a little bit more familiar. Instead of x over 2, I'm going to just call it 1/2 x. All right, so let's find our derivative. Product rule. So this would be like the A here, and this thing here would be the B. Okay, so A prime would simply be F prime. B is arc sine of 1/2 x. A is f of x. And B prime is going to be, the derivative of arc sine is a little strange. It is 1 over the square root of 1 minus something squared. And that something is whatever's inside the parentheses times the derivative of the inside. The derivative of the inside is 1/2. Okay, so there is our derivatives. Now we want to plug in -1. So I plugged in my -1, and that was the result. Now, we're almost done. We just need to figure out what these f pieces are. You don't have to simplify anything else. You don't have to simplify the arc sine. You don't have to simplify the big square root thing over there. You can leave those alone. We just need to evaluate what the f's are. So f prime of -1 is 6/5. F of -1 is -2. And we are officially done at that point. Okay? So, that ends our FRQs for the day. Hopefully that was helpful. We'll see you guys next time.